Fundamentally, when de Klerk finally said it was over, what he understood was that the idea of the country had been rejected by the entire civilized world. The fight was over not because of the ANC's bombs. The fight was over because the idea was dead. So lest we say to ourselves, well, as long as Israel has a powerful air force, as long as Israeli soldiers keep going to the front, and we'll come back to that about whether they will or they won't, as long as Israel has the things that have kept it secure for so long, I don't really care if they try Israel in the court of international opinion. You should care. Because history shows us that countries, the ideas behind which are completely delegitimized and devalued, are countries which at the end of the day do not survive. Do not survive. That is why the current Palestinian and Arab and Muslim and European and more than that, all across the world, the attempt of these very many groups to do what they are doing is so unbelievably clever. You don't have to shoot down any Israeli aircraft. You don't actually have to kill any Israeli civilians. You don't need any more suicide bombers. You can do the kinds of things that the Western world completely approves of. YouTube and op-eds and protests on campus and books and ideas, and you can simply pull the carpet out from under the country in not one fell swoop, but one long, gradual swoop, and make the country fundamentally indefensible. That is what you and I are witnessing today, whether you recognize it or not. When Jimmy Carter writes a book called Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid, when he chooses to obviously refer to Israel as an apartheid state, what he is telling you is that what happened to the former South Africa is what happens to the present Israel. When he chooses to call the country Palestine, not Israel, he's telling you what he thinks the future ought to look like. Is that ideas matter in the world in which we live. Ideas have always mattered, for better and for worse. It was only a very short while between the publication of the Communist Manifesto before the Communist Revolution took place. It was only a matter of decades between the time that Herzl wrote Der Judenstaat and the United Nations voted in November 47 to actually create the state that he had written about approximately 5 decades earlier. It's true with women's rights. It's true with secularism in the Western world. It's true with all sorts of things that we can't go into now. Ideas matter tremendously still. And the idea of the Zionist enterprise is on trial in the court of international opinion. And you see it with Carter and the UN and Goldstone and Gaza and the flotilla and Jute and Zinn and Cohen, and I could give you lots more examples, which we don't have time to do. But here's what you need to understand. If this trial in the court of international opinion convicts the idea of a Jewish state, if this trial in the court of international opinion convinces people, students and professors and lay people and this and that Zionism is a fundamentally evil idea, like communism, like apartheid, etc., we can lose the state. You do not need to have a vivid imagination to imagine how it happens. It can happen very easily. And then within half a generation, we are Tibetans and Chechens and Basques. And the sense of pride that American Jewish kids have in who they are turns into something very, very different. The sense of belonging, the sense of walking with your spine fully upright, all of that disappears. And while it's probably true that the Jews would continue, yes, I actually do believe that 62 years of independence have made it virtually impossible for us to go back to that. There are people who disagree with me, and I think they're wrong. That's all. I actually think that 62 years of independence mean that if, God forbid, we went back to that, the second massive loss, first 6 million Jews between 41 and 45, and now the only instance of Jewish sovereignty in over 2,000 years, for those to be lost in the space of approximately a century, one from the other, would be 2 overwhelming blows from which we would not recover nearly as fast as you might like to.